The town of Yamarishi sat cradled in the arms of green mountains, where clouds drifted low and the air smelled of pine and old rain. Wooden houses, stooped with age and covered in moss, lined narrow streets that curved like lazy rivers. It was the kind of place where you heard more cicadas than cars, where people left doors unlocked and knew each other by name, or, at the very least, by family. It was quiet here, and no one was quieter than Hannah. She lived near the edge of town, where the forest pressed close and the wind always seemed to whisper through the branches. Her house was small, lived in. The garden was neat, the windows clean. Her mother worked at the post office. Her father had passed away when she was 6. Since then, Hannah had grown inward, not shy exactly, but careful. She spoke little, watched much, and moved through life like a shadow just at the edge of the light. Every morning, she walked to school with her satchel clutched close and her eyes on the path ahead. She never spoke during the walk, but she always paused at the gate because he would be there. Echo. No one knew where he came from. Some said he was born in the woods. Others claimed he belonged to an old woman who had passed years ago, and he simply chose to stay. Echo was a sleek, gray cat with silver-tipped fur and eyes like winter smoke. His ears were always alert, twitching at sounds no one else seemed to hear. He never begged for food or attention. He simply watched, mostly from the low stone wall outside the schoolyard, or from a shaded branch overhead. Watching the teachers, the children, the birds, the wind, watching Hannah. First, she only looked back. Then, one morning, she set a small square of grilled fish on the stone ledge. She didn't speak, just left it there and walked inside. He didn't touch it until she disappeared around the corner. The next day, he was waiting. A slow, silent friendship grew between them in the way moss grows on stone. Patient and unspoken. She never tried to pet him. He never came too close. But they shared the space, the silence, and the small rituals of trust. Some days she left bits of boiled egg or tiny dried sardines. Sometimes he brought things, too. A feather, a shiny stone, once even a cherry blossom petal perfectly intact, though it was out of season. Other kids noticed, but only in passing. "That weird cat likes you," someone said once. Hannah didn't respond. Teachers ignored him. To them, Echo was just a stray who never caused trouble. He didn't yowl or scratch or dart into classrooms. He simply listened. Hannah often wondered what he heard. The town never really changed, and that was part of its charm. The same shopkeepers opened their stores at dawn. The same old men played shogi under the shrine's red torii gate. The same summer winds swept up from the forest, full of scent and song. But Echo always seemed to be tuned into something else, something beneath the ordinary rhythm of things. He would freeze, ears up, tail low, staring into the woods for minutes at a time. Once, Hannah followed his gaze. There was nothing, just the sway of cedar trees and the flicker of sunlight on leaves. Still, Echo stared, and so did she. One Thursday, after the last bell rang and the students rushed out in a clatter of laughter and bags, Hannah lingered. It was the kind of afternoon that made your skin feel warm and your heart quiet. Echo was perched near the gate again, tail flicking lazily. She sat beside him on the ledge. He didn't move away. She took a rice cracker from her pocket, broke it in two, and set one half near him. He sniffed it, then ignored it. Hannah smiled a little, barely a curl of her lips. Then he froze. Not the usual kind of freeze. This was sudden, sharp. His body went rigid, eyes wide. His ears angled in two separate directions, one toward the mountain, one toward the forest beyond the soccer field. Hannah blinked and looked around. Nothing, just the rustle of paper in the wind, the caw of a crow. Then Echo turned his head sharply, toward the north, where the road bent into the hills and vanished into green. A sound. Hannah couldn't hear it. Not yet. But she could see in his eyes that something was there. Something far away. Low. Distant. Not wind. Not animal. Something wrong. Echo let out a low chirp, almost like a warning. Then, without a sound, he leapt from the wall and darted toward the woods. "Echo!" Hannah called out, surprising even herself with the sudden sound of her voice. But he was gone. She stood, listening. The trees whispered. Her heart felt strange, like something had shifted just beneath her skin, and the world had taken a breath it wouldn't let go. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, watching the shadows move across her ceiling, the shape of tree branches shifting as the wind played outside. Her mind circled Echo's reaction over and over. The way his ears moved, the way he bolted. She pressed her hand against the window pane. The glass was cold. Somewhere out there, Echo was listening to something, and she wished, for the first time in a long time, that she could hear it too. The mountain town of Yamaishi had always felt untouched, preserved in a bubble of time and gentle routine. Even the seasons arrived like old friends, predictable, familiar. Spring came with plum blossoms and school bells. Summer brought the droning chorus of cicadas. Autumn dressed the hills in fire-red leaves, and winter whispered its hush with soft snow and wood smoke. But now, something had shifted. Hannah felt it before she understood it. In the way the air seemed restless, in the way her skin prickled on cloudless days. Even the wind felt different, dry, almost brittle, as if it carried secrets too heavy to speak aloud. Echo was the first to show it. At first, Hannah thought he was simply more alert, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, ears turning sharply to sounds only he could hear. He paced along fences instead of lounging on them. He followed children halfway home, then darted back toward the forest with fur bristled and tail low. One morning, Echo didn't appear at the school gate. Hannah waited by the wall until the first bell rang. She didn't speak of it, but her heart thudded uneasily all through math and science, and during lunch she found herself glancing out the window over and over, hoping to catch a flash of gray fur. He returned that afternoon, dirty and wild-eyed. His paws were covered in dried mud. Pine needles clung to his coat. His ears twitched constantly, as if trying to block something out. "Echo," Hannah murmured. He didn't approach her like he usually did. Instead, he stared past her, toward the north woods, toward the hills. That night, Hannah took out an old-school notebook and began writing. Echo didn't come this morning. Returned after lunch, covered in dirt. Not hungry. Looks tired. Watched the trees for a long time. The following days only deepened the strangeness. Birds began leaving early, long before the usual chill of autumn. A cluster of swallows vanished almost overnight. Sparrows filled the trees for a day, then disappeared. Hannah watched their shadows flit across her garden, then fade. The stream behind the school, once full of frogs and glinting minnows, had thinned to a trickle. Its bed, usually smooth and damp, was dry enough to crack. Stones sat exposed like bones. Even the neighborhood dogs were barking more, not at passers-by, but at empty corners and tree lines. And through it all, Echo grew stranger. He began vanishing for hours, once an entire day. He'd return with fur tangled by the wind, paws raw, eyes blinking like he hadn't slept. He no longer lounged. He prowled. He no longer napped in the sun. He stood guard in it. Hannah started recording everything. She brought her notebook everywhere, sketching Echo's posture, noting when he stared at the hills or growled at nothing. She wrote about the birds, the stream, the low hum she began hearing in the evening. Not quite a sound, more like the weight of silence growing too heavy. She told no one, not because she didn't trust them, but because she didn't know what to say. Would anyone believe her if she said a stray cat was warning them? On a Sunday evening, just before dusk, Hannah sat on the stone wall where she first met Echo. She had a rice ball in her lap and her notebook beside her. The air was cool, but not cold. Leaves rustled faintly in the trees, though the wind had died hours ago. Echo sat a few feet away, his tail curled tight, his eyes locked on the forest. "Hear anything?" Hannah asked softly. He didn't respond, but his ears flicked, and his body tensed. Suddenly, he stood. He began to walk, not casually but like a soldier on a mission, past the school gate, past the swings, toward the edge of town, where the road gave way to wild grass and dirt paths that wound up the mountain. Hannah stood, hesitated, then followed. She called his name once, twice. Still, he moved forward, faster. He sprinted now, low and fast, tail straight, feet barely touching the ground. And then he stopped, at the edge of the forest, on a patch of bare earth, and howled. It wasn't a meow. It was a raw, guttural, drawn-out wail. It echoed through the valley. It startled birds from the trees. It made Hannah's chest twist. He cried out again, long and loud, mouth wide, body taut. A warning. The wind returned in that moment, sudden and sharp. It rushed down from the hills and through the trees like it had been holding its breath. It whipped Hannah's hair and set the leaves spinning. Echo cried a third time, his voice hoarse now, broken. Then silence. The forest listened. Hannah did too. Somewhere far in the distance, something groaned. Deep, earthy, like the bones of the mountain shifting in their sleep. Hannah stepped toward Echo, but he had already begun walking back, slow now, as if the sound had drained something from him. She watched him disappear down the hill. She sat on the bare patch of earth, staring into the darkness beneath the trees. The town of Yamaishi glowed behind her, warm and golden and unaware. And Hannah wrote, her fingers trembling against the page. Echo howled, not like a cat, like something trying to warn us. I think something is coming. It wasn't easy to talk about something no one else could feel. Hannah sat at the dinner table, her spoon paused halfway to her mouth, as her parents read the local paper. A headline about the autumn harvest, another about the community festival. Nothing about strange winds or silent forests. Nothing about gray cats that howled at the trees. Mama, Hannah said carefully, do you think animals know things before people do? Her mother looked up from the rice cooker. What do you mean? Like, before something bad happens. Like earthquakes. Her father chuckled from behind the paper. You mean those stories about dogs barking before tremors? Old superstition. Maybe not, Hannah said. Echo's been acting strange. Pacing. Watching the forest. He howled the other night. Loud. 3 times. Her mother turned. He's just a stray, Hannah-chan. Maybe a little sick. That's all. But he's not. He's warning us. I think... She hesitated. I think something's wrong with the mountain. The silence that followed wasn't the kind she hoped for. It wasn't the quiet of someone listening. It was the stillness of 2 adults trying to decide how to gently dismiss a child's worry. Her father folded his paper with a smile. You've always had a big imagination. Maybe too many comics, her mother added, with a soft laugh. Or maybe it's that late-night YouTube again. Hannah dropped her gaze to her rice bowl. She didn't say another word that night. The next morning, Echo was already at the school gates, pacing, tail lashing, ears twitching. Hannah, called her classmate Sora, your cat's being weird again. He's not mine, she murmured, but walked faster. Echo didn't greet her like usual. He stood in front of the entrance and let out a sharp, piercing yowl. Some students hesitated. Others laughed. Is it sick? Did it eat something bad? Should we call the animal lady? A teacher came over, waving his arms. Shoo! Shoo! But Echo didn't move. He hissed, then sat down unmoving as if guarding the doors. It took 2 staff members and a mop to chase him away. He darted into the bushes, growling low. Hannah's chest ached. In the staff room during lunch, she tried again. Sensei, she asked her homeroom teacher, what if Echo's trying to warn us? About what? The woman asked gently. Something bad. Maybe a storm. Or worse. The teacher smiled in the way adults do when they want to be kind but firm. He's just a stray. Maybe he doesn't like noise. Or maybe he's getting old. He's not old, Hannah said. He's strong, sharp. He knows something. The teacher gave a small nod, then changed the subject. Hannah didn't push, but she began writing even more in her notebook. Every time Echo appeared, every direction he stared, what the clouds looked like, if birds flew differently, even the smell of the wind. She borrowed books from the library. She searched terms on her parents' tablet at night. Do cats sense earthquakes? Animals acting strange before disasters. Why do cats stare at nothing? And she found them. Stories from Japan, Indonesia, Italy. Tales of dogs whining hours before tremors. Cats hiding. Birds falling silent. Even old village legends where animals fled moments before landslides or eruptions. She copied down notes. They listen differently. They feel things under the earth. They move before the world does. Echo became more determined. He began showing up during school hours, weaving through the courtyard, standing in doorways. He yowled during morning assembly. He hissed at the windows during history class. He refused food some days, too focused on the sky or the hills beyond the soccer field. He watched everything, everyone, and people noticed. I think that cat's crazy, said one student. It scratched my brother's backpack, muttered another. The vice principal spoke during morning announcements. If anyone knows who's feeding the stray near the school, please stop. It's becoming a disturbance. Someone suggested animal control. Hannah's chest clenched. That night, she sat with Echo behind the tool shed, hidden from the main street. He leaned into her palm as she stroked his head, purring low. They think you're just causing trouble, she whispered. But I know. I believe you. He looked up, ears flicking, and then he pressed his forehead against hers. It wasn't something Echo ever did. The touch was brief but warm. A thank you, a plea, promise. The wind changed the next day. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it carried weight, like breath held too long. Trees swayed before the breeze even reached them. Windows rattled faintly in their frames. By noon, the clouds hung lower than usual, not gray, but bruised purple at the edges. Echo stood on Hannah's porch when she returned home, not curled up, not waiting for food. He stood tall, tail flicking, ears locked on the mountains that rose beyond the town's edge. His body was still, but his fur lifted slightly with every gust of air, like static pulled from the earth itself. And Hannah, standing beside him, finally heard it too. A low hum beneath the wind, faint, deep, like a drumbeat echoing from inside the mountain. Echo, she breathed. What is it? He didn't move, didn't meow, just stared. And the wind howled again. Not through trees or alleyways, but straight down the valley, like a voice screaming without words. The town lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a dog began barking. Echo didn't flinch. It started with meows. Not soft, not the kind Echo used when asking for scraps or attention. These were loud, sharp cries that pierced the stillness of the early morning like a siren. Hannah opened her window and saw him, Echo, pacing in tight circles on the stone wall outside her house, tail fluffed, ears twitching in all directions. She hurried outside in her school uniform, the chill air biting at her skin. What's wrong? She asked softly, crouching down. Echo didn't stop pacing. He paused only to let out another cry, looking up toward the mountain behind their town. It wasn't hunger. He hadn't even touched the small dish of tuna she'd left the night before. Something was different. By the time Hannah got to school, Echo had already beaten her there. He sat directly in front of the main entrance, blocking the path like a little gray sentinel. When students approached, he stood and yowled, circling their feet. Whoa, this cat again. Why is it meowing so much? Hannah hurried forward, trying to calm him. Echo, it's okay, she whispered, reaching out a hand. He didn't hiss or run, but he didn't quiet either. He pressed against her legs, turned to the doors, and cried again, long and insistent. A teacher came out, clapping his hands. Shoo! Shoo! Wait, Hannah said. Please, he's just scared. He's disturbing the students, Hannah-chan, the teacher said. Strays don't belong on school grounds. But, she hesitated. What if he's trying to warn us? The teacher blinked. Warn us? Yes, I think something's wrong. Echo's been acting strange for days. He's alert all the time. I read that animals. The man gave a kindly, dismissive smile. You're a good girl for caring. But cats don't predict disasters. Let's be reasonable. Hannah stepped back as he shooed Echo with a broom. The cat hissed and retreated to the bushes near the parking lot. At lunch, Hannah tried again, this time with her homeroom teacher, a younger woman named Miss Cato. Miss, can I ask you something? Of course. Have you ever heard of animals sensing earthquakes before they happen? The teacher tilted her head. I've read about that, yes. Dogs barking, birds flying away. Do you think it's real? Well, Miss Cato paused. It's interesting, but it's not scientifically proven. Hannah nodded slowly. I think Echo knows something. I really do. Miss Cato smiled gently. Maybe he's just nervous about the changing season. Autumn brings wind, and animals feel it more than we do. But he's guarding the school, Mississippi. He won't let people in. Miss Cato laughed a little. He's probably just being territorial. Hannah looked down at her tray. I don't think it's that simple. By the end of the week, everyone knew Echo. Here comes the school cat, someone joked as he trotted along the walkway beside the gym. He won't shut up. I saw him outside the bakery yesterday, howling at a wall. Even the town bulletin board had a new poster. Notice, a stray gray cat has been causing disturbances near the elementary school. If anyone knows its owner, please come forward. Otherwise, animal control may be contacted next week. Hannah felt sick when she read it. That night, she stayed up late at her desk, flashlight under the covers, researching on her phone. Pets acting strange before disasters. How animals sense danger. Unusual animal behavior before earthquakes. Landslides. She found stories, whole articles. A woman in Kobe who swore her cat hid under the bed hours before a major quake. A farmer in Niigata who said his chickens refused to come out of the coop before a landslide. Dogs barking at empty fields. Birds vanishing days too early. She scribbled in her notebook. Echo meowing at shadows. Echo not eating. Echo pacing. Echo blocking doors. Birds flying away from the mountain. The stream behind town running low. It was all there. Patterns. Warnings. But how could she convince people who only saw a nuisance? The following morning, Hannah didn't go straight to school. She took a detour to the back road near the forest. She had noticed something strange the day before. The stream that ran behind the town, usually quick and cheerful, was almost dry. Just a few trickles over stones, like breath through cracked lips. Birdsong was rare now. Squirrels that usually scurried through the trees had vanished. Even the deer tracks she liked to spot had stopped appearing in the mud. The mountain was holding its breath, and Echo knew it. At school, Echo showed up again, this time during class. He meowed outside the windows, tail flicking, eyes wide. He wouldn't leave. Some of the boys laughed. One girl said she was scared. A teacher sighed heavily and closed the shutters. Hannah watched through the crack. He was still there, waiting. After school, Hannah walked home slowly. Her backpack felt heavier than usual. People passed by, barely noticing the wind picking up, the way clouds pressed low over the mountains like a lid on a boiling pot. She reached her gate and froze. Echo was already there, sitting on her porch like a statue. His fur was puffed slightly, and his eyes were focused on the distance. "Hannah!" her mother called from inside. "You're late." But Hannah didn't answer right away. She walked slowly up the path and sat beside Echo. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the trees, where the wind had started to move differently. It wasn't a breeze anymore. It had rhythm, a pulse. It pushed, paused, then pushed again, like the air itself was preparing for something. Echo's ears flattened, his tail coiled, and then, all at once, the wind howled. Not through branches or leaves but down from the mountains like a cry. Not a sound, a warning. Hannah felt it in her chest. Echo didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared forward, muscles tight, as if every nerve in his body waited for what was coming. She reached out and placed her hand on his back. "I believe you," she said, and together they waited in the wind. It began with rain. At first, just a steady drizzle tapping on the roof tiles, enough to paint the roads a deeper gray. But by midnight, it turned into a relentless downpour, pounding, wild, angry. The wind roared louder than it had in years, rattling windows, bending trees. Hannah lay awake in bed, hugging her pillow tight. Echo had disappeared earlier that evening. He hadn't come for dinner. Not a scratch at the door, not a shadow darting past the porch light. Just gone. That had never happened before. Not without a reason. She sat up and checked her phone. 1:37 a.m. No messages, no updates, only the sound of the storm screaming outside and her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Then, a deep rumble. At first, she thought it was thunder, but it didn't stop. It grew. The floor trembled. Her books shifted slightly on the shelf. A glass in the kitchen crashed. Then came a sound she would never forget. A tearing roar, earth screaming as it broke apart. The mountain had moved. Sirens wailed into the night. Emergency alerts flashed across phones. Hannah's mother ran to her room, breathless, pulling her into a hug. "There's been a landslide," she said, voice trembling. "Part of the east slope. Roads are buried. Some homes." She stopped herself. Outside, red and white lights strobed the rain-soaked darkness. Morning brought no sun, only more rain and thick clouds that made it feel like dusk never ended. The town was chaos. Hannah, wrapped in a raincoat too big for her, stood outside the community hall turn shelter with her parents. A rescue vehicle roared past, splashing mud over its wheels. They were still trying to assess the damage. Rumors spread fast. The back road was gone. The river had jumped its banks. The old footbridge collapsed. And the school, someone whispered. Some kids were there last night. Hannah's head snapped up. The after-school program, the woman continued. They hadn't left before the storm started. 5 or 6 kids. 2 teachers. The roads were too unstable to get through. Phones weren't connecting. Hannah's stomach twisted. She knew who might know a way in. She ran from the shelter, slipping in mud, ignoring her mother's call behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of town, the narrow path that led toward the school's forested back trail. "Echo?" she called, voice hoarse. "Echo, where are you?" Wind tugged at her hood. Rain soaked her socks. Nothing answered. "Please," she whispered, eyes scanning the trees. "Please." Then movement. A flash of gray. She turned sharply, heart stuttering. There, just above the school grounds, half hidden among twisted trees and broken branches, Echo. He stood on a ridge, tail fluffed, fur plastered to his thin frame. He let out a sharp, broken yowl that carried across the drenched air. "Echo!" Hannah cried, but the cat didn't come to her. He turned, ran a few paces along the ridge, then stopped, looked back, and cried again. It wasn't random. He was leading. "Hannah!" someone shouted behind her. She turned to see Miss Cato, drenched in a raincoat, struggling up the hill. "I've been looking everywhere. What are you doing here?" "There are kids trapped at the school," Hannah said, panting. "Echo knows a way in." The teacher looked toward the slope. "That's too dangerous. The paths are unstable." The rescue team said. "There's no time," Hannah said, voice shaking. "Echo's trying to help. He's been warning us for days. He knows." Miss Cato's eyes flicked up to the ridge where Echo was pacing again. "A cat doesn't. He does," Hannah cried, surprising even herself. "Please, just watch him. Look." Echo darted forward again, then paused, staring directly at them. He let out another low, insistent meow. Miss Cato hesitated. The wind surged through the trees again. In the distance, another siren echoed. "Do you trust me?" Hannah asked. Miss Cato looked at her. Not the quiet girl who never raised her hand. Not the soft-spoken child always sitting alone. But this girl, mud on her coat, rain streaking her cheeks, eyes full of something sharper than fear. "Yes," Miss Cato whispered. "I do." They followed Echo. The cat darted along narrow, overgrown trails that twisted behind the school, paths too old and unused for the main roads. Fallen branches littered the way, and mud slipped beneath their feet. Echo waited at each turn, yowling if they slowed down. Branches scraped their coats. The air grew heavier, the storm easing only slightly, but Hannah didn't feel the cold anymore. Her heartbeat kept her warm, or maybe it was something else. Hope. Finally, the trees broke. They reached a clearing behind the gym where the building stood intact but silent. No lights, no movement. Echo sprinted to the side door and began pawing at it. Hannah ran forward and knocked hard. "Hello? Is anyone there?" A moment of stillness. Then a voice, muffled, small. "Help!" Miss Cato rushed to the door and managed to wrench it open. Inside were 5 children, some crying, others wide-eyed. 2 teachers huddled with them. The roof had leaked. They were cold, scared. Their phones had died. They thought no one would come until morning. "We didn't know if the building would hold," one teacher whispered, shaking. "How did you get here?" Hannah looked toward the open door, where Echo sat in the rain, tail curling around his paws. "We followed the only one who knew the way." By the time rescue crews arrived, guided by signals and Miss Cato's radio, news had already begun to spread. About the strange little cat, the girl who listened, the hidden path no one remembered. Echo didn't wait for applause. As they bundled the children into blankets, Echo slipped away, quiet as he had come. But Hannah knew he'd be back. That night, the rain stopped, the wind calmed, and Echo returned to Hannah's porch, leaping up silently and curling against her door as if nothing had happened. When she stepped outside, blanket in hand, he didn't move away. He let her sit beside him. She stroked his soaked fur and whispered, "Thank you." Echo's ears twitched toward the mountain, still and looming. But now Hannah thought it sounded quieter, and for the first time in days, so did her heart. No one on the rescue team expected to follow a cat. They had gear strapped to their backs, radios clipped to their shoulders, and boots built for trekking through collapsed roads and unstable terrain. But none of them had a guide quite like Echo. The gray cat was already soaked from the storm, fur clumped with mud and pine needles. He didn't hesitate as he stepped onto the trailhead behind the school, pausing only to glance over his shoulder, ears twitching at the sound of distant shouting and cracking branches. Lieutenant Eerie, the team leader, adjusted his helmet and stared at the narrow path in front of them. "You're telling me this cat knows the way?" Miss Cato, standing just behind Hannah, gave a small nod. "He brought us to the school last night, safely. We would have been stuck if not for him." Eerie looked unconvinced. "And the path? Old logging route, closed for decades. No one uses it anymore." She pointed ahead. "But Echo does." The lieutenant studied the cat for another breath. then gave a single sharp command, "Let's move." The path was no wider than a deer trail, twisting between tall cedar trees and underbrush heavy with rain. The earth was slick and uneven, but unlike the other routes, it held. Echo led with uncanny precision. At each fork he paused, tail stiff, ears perked, tilting his head as if listening to something just beyond human hearing. Then, with certainty, he chose a direction and darted ahead. Twice, he stopped abruptly, blocking the team's path. The first time, a young volunteer almost stepped forward, until Echo hissed sharply and raised a paw. Eerie ordered everyone to freeze. Carefully, they inspected the ground and found the edge of a shallow sinkhole, just wide enough to swallow a person's leg and twist it in the fall. "All right," Eerie muttered. "That's not luck." The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time they reached the school's back clearing. The building loomed ahead, weather-beaten but still standing. No smoke, no movement. A single crooked window flickered as if a flashlight had been waved inside. "They're in there," Hannah said softly. As Echo bounded toward the building, Eerie signaled the team forward. They broke into two groups, one heading to secure the perimeter, the other toward the emergency side door where Hannah and Miss Cato had entered the night before. A short burst of knocking, a pause, then a teacher's voice behind the door, shaky, breathless. "We're here." Within minutes, the children and staff were ushered out, wrapped in thermal blankets and led carefully back down Echo's path, now confirmed as the safest route through the damaged landscape. One boy, sniffling into a blanket, tugged on Hannah's sleeve. "Was it really the cat that brought you?" Hannah nodded. "It was Echo. Is he magic or something?" She looked toward the trees. Echo was sitting on a low stone wall, grooming his muddy paw like nothing had happened. "No," she said softly. "He just listens better than anyone." Word spread before the sun rose. By morning, the rescue story was everywhere. From the worn bulletin board outside the bakery to buzzing phones in the cafe. They called it miraculous, a forgotten path, a missing cat, a quiet girl no one had really listened to, and somehow all of it coming together to lead rescuers to the children who might not have survived the night alone. "He stopped them from stepping into a sinkhole," one report said. "The cat knew where to go," another quoted. But the best story came from a younger firefighter who admitted on a live stream, "I didn't believe it at first, but every time I doubted him, the cat proved me wrong." In the following days, people started asking questions. Not just about the rescue, but about Echo. Where did he come from? Why does he stay near the school? Has he always been this smart? Miss Cato shrugged. "He's always been observant. But maybe it's not about being smart. Maybe he just pays attention to what the rest of us ignore." Some children began leaving out small bowls of food along the old trail's entrance. Others hung signs that read, "Thank you, Echo, guardian of the forest, hero cat." But Echo didn't linger. As the town busied itself with cleanup, as roads were cleared and supplies delivered, the cat disappeared into the trees, silent, watchful as ever. Hannah returned to the porch that night, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She stared into the dark woods, eyes searching, and then she saw it. A single paw print in the wet earth at the bottom of the steps. Small, muddy, deliberate. She knelt and traced it gently with her fingers. "Good night, Echo," she whispered. Far beyond the trees, an owl called once, and somewhere deeper still, a gray shadow moved, listening, always listening. At first, it started with whispers. In the bakery line, at the bus stop, in the sleepy hum of the town's only cafe, stories drifted between neighbors, soft as snowflakes. "Did you hear what the cat did? They say he found the children, led the rescuers himself. My niece swears he stopped a man from falling into a sinkhole." And as with all stories, the tale of Echo grew roots, not just in conversations, but in hearts. By the end of the week, Everyone knew his name. The townspeople began leaving little gifts near the edge of the forest. Hand-knitted toys, bowls filled with dry food or tuna flakes, a carefully placed saucer of milk under the shelter of a crooked fence. Someone even hung a ribbon sign that read in blocky, childlike writing, "Thank you, Echo, our hero cat." No one had seen him for days, but the offerings continued. The children at the local school drew pictures of a gray cat with wide, alert ears and clever eyes. The classroom walls were papered in bright crayon sketches of Echo leaping over rocks, guiding firefighters, perched high like a guardian of the woods. Some included Hannah, always next to him, the quiet girl who'd heard what others hadn't. News crews arrived 2 days after the rescue. Their vans came in humming and crunching over gravel roads, bringing cameras, microphones, and hosts with polished smiles. The town, small, quiet, and unused to attention, braced awkwardly. At first, the reporters spoke with the rescue team, interviewing Lieutenant Eerie and the firefighters. But before long, they sought out the girl who had first trusted the cat. Hannah didn't want to speak. When the woman in the red coat asked for just a moment of your time, Hannah had looked to Miss Cato uncertainly. "It's your story too," her teacher said gently. So, sitting on a bench near the school, Hannah answered a few quiet questions. The camera light blinked red. Hannah tugged her sleeves over her hands, eyes on the ground. "Do you think Echo is special?" the reporter asked. Hannah hesitated, then looked up and answered in a soft voice that barely reached the microphone. "He just listened, when no one else did." The clip aired that evening. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times online. Commenters from distant cities wrote, "I wish I had an Echo. How did that little cat know? Kids and animals always sense things before we do." One artist posted a painting of Echo under a star-filled sky. Poet wrote a haiku. A small animal rescue in Kyoto offered to donate food in his honor. In their quiet mountain town, Hannah walked to school and saw her own words printed on the community board next to the bus stop. "He just listened." Beneath it was a hand-drawn cat with oversized ears and a proud little stance. But Echo didn't return. Day after day passed, and the blanket Hannah had left on the porch remained untouched. No paw prints in the snow, no flash of gray fur, no sharp ears peeking through brush. Sometimes Hannah imagined she heard him. A rustle near the old logging path, a soft meow in the wind. But when she turned, there was nothing. Miss Cato offered her rides home, knowing she walked slower now, always watching the woods. One evening, Hannah sat on the porch and opened the small notebook where she'd been writing down Echo's habits. Once so strange, now the pages felt more like memories than records. Day 37. Still gone. Snow's falling. I left sardines and his favorite blanket. I said his name again, just in case he hears. The first true snow came quietly. No thunder, no wind, only the hush of cold air brushing over rooftops, the soft patter of flakes kissing the ground. By morning, the town was white and still. Hannah stood outside her house, wrapped in a coat far too big for her, a scarf trailing behind her like a quiet tail. She stepped carefully across the yard, her boots leaving prints beside smaller ones. Birds, maybe, or a squirrel, nothing gray and feline. She knelt at the edge of the porch, where the wood dipped slightly beneath the railing. The blanket lay there, now dusted with snow. Gently, she shook it out and folded it again. She placed it back down, smoothing it with her mittened hand. Then, as the sky turned a soft violet, she whispered into the cold. Echo, just his name. No plea, no command. A hope, a reminder that someone was still listening. Inside, the fireplace crackled faintly. Through the frosted window, Hannah sat curled in a chair with her notebook, staring into the white silence. Outside, under the porch, a fresh flake landed on the edge of the folded blanket and vanished. The days shortened into long stretches of gray, and the mountains slumbered beneath heavy white blankets. Yet still, life in the town stirred forward. Roads were cleared, the school reopened, damaged homes and paths slowly rebuilt. But amidst the quiet rebuilding, Hannah's search never truly ended. Each morning before school and each late afternoon before dusk, she wandered into the woods with her scarf pulled up to her nose and a satchel of food swinging from her shoulder. She stepped carefully between snow-covered roots, her boots making soft crunches that echoed in the stillness. The townspeople grew used to the sight of her, the quiet girl disappearing into the trees, returning with wind-bitten cheeks and hopeful eyes. She stopped often at the old forest shrines, the mossy stone markers leaning like sleepy old men. There, she left offerings: a folded blanket, sardines, a hand-drawn sketch of a cat with bright ears and a question-mark tail. Sometimes she whispered, "If you hear this, come back." But the woods gave nothing in return but the sigh of wind through pine and the hush of snow drifting from branches. Rumors began as whispers. At the general store, an elderly man with foggy glasses said he'd seen a flash of gray fur bounding along the creek near dusk. "Quick as anything," he mumbled. "Looked right at me, then gone." A second story came from a mother walking her toddler home from the clinic. The child, barely able to form full sentences, suddenly stopped and pointed at the mountains. "Kitty," she whispered. "Kitty's singing." And in the hills behind the abandoned shrine, a group of middle schoolers reported hearing a cry. Not a bird, not a fox. "It sounded like a meow," one of them said. "A long one, kinda lonely." Each time, Hannah marked the spot in her notebook, drawing lines and stars beside each new lead. She followed the trails carefully, even when it meant walking into deep snow. She knew Echo's prints, the light, careful ones, with the faint hook of his back claws. And though she often found paw prints, they never lasted. The snow swallowed them too fast. Sometimes she sat beneath the twisted pine tree where they had once shared a quiet hour together, his body curled beside her like a question with no answer. She would sit with her knees tucked under her coat and whisper into the silence. She started dreaming of him. In her dreams, the snow was soft and glowing, the trees tall as giants. Echo walked ahead of her, never far, always just visible. A flash of gray weaving through trunks. She followed him in silence. The forest was filled with sound. A low hum, a deep vibration beneath the earth. Sometimes she heard it as music, other times as a voice without words. Echo would pause, glance back at her, his ears alert. Then he'd continue forward, as if he knew the way and simply needed her to follow. One night, the dream changed. The forest was gone. She was home, on the porch watching the snowfall. The blanket she had left for him was gone, and in its place was a single muddy paw print, still fresh. She reached for it. As her fingers brushed the wood, she heard a soft sound, a meow. It came not from the dream, but from beyond it, a whisper threading through the veil of sleep. Her eyes flew open. The room was quiet. She sat up slowly in bed, the warmth of sleep still clinging to her limbs like fog. The world was wrapped in pale moonlight, silvered and hushed. Her blanket slid off her shoulders as she turned toward the window. Nothing. She held her breath. And there it was again, faint, fragile. Meow. She didn't move at first, afraid it was a memory or another piece of her dream escaping the edges of her mind. Then she heard it once more, softer, closer. She threw back the blanket, not bothering with slippers or robe, and ran quietly to the back door. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and peered out into the night. Snow coated the porch, fresh and undisturbed. But just beyond the wooden railing, something shifted. A small shape, low to the ground, gray fur dusted with snow. Another meow, hoarse but familiar. She opened the door. The cold slapped her face like a warning, But she didn't care. She stepped out barefoot, her eyes wide. The shape straightened slightly. It was thinner than before, fur matted and ears twitching. But those eyes, wide, knowing, listening, were unmistakable. "Echo?" she whispered, his head tilted, ears pricking at the sound of her voice. She took one step forward, then another. He didn't move. She sank to her knees in the snow. "I knew you'd hear me." Slowly, carefully, Echo walked to her, one paw at a time, as if testing the truth of her presence. When his head finally touched her knee, she felt warmth flood her chest like spring returning all at once. She wrapped her arms around him gently. His purr, ragged and real, rumbled against her ribs. Above them, the wind blew gently through the trees. But in the silence that followed, there was a sound only they heard. Something quiet, something true. The snow fell in soft, silent flurries as Hannah stepped beyond the edge of her porch, drawn forward by the faint, unmistakable sound. It wasn't loud. A small, fragile meow, barely louder than a breath. But she had learned to listen like Echo, with her whole heart. The moon hung high, a pale coin above the mountains, casting the woods in silver light. Hannah walked slowly, the cold nipping at her feet through thin socks, but she didn't feel it. She moved like she had in the dream, silent, steady, certain. The sound came again. She followed it, through the small gate behind her home, past the stone path dusted in frost, into the trees that whispered of memory. Her breath made small clouds in the dark. The forest opened around her, welcoming her back. She stepped between the trees, snow crunching softly beneath her, the sound muffled by the hush of winter. Then she saw it, the old shrine, the one nearly hidden by time and ivy and roots, stood still beneath a leaning pine. Its wooden frame sagged slightly under the weight of snow, its small offering platform bare except for one thing. Curled beneath the wooden steps, tucked into a hollow made of roots and time, was a small gray shape. Echo. He didn't stir at first. His body was thinner, fur matted in places, his tail wrapped tight around him for warmth. But his ears twitched at her steps. "Echo," Hannah breathed, his head lifted. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The wind paused, as if holding its breath. Then slowly Echo stood, unsteady at first, then stronger with each step. He walked to her, his paws silent on the snow, and leaned gently into her legs. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapping around him with the tenderness of something sacred. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry, not yet. She buried her face into the side of his neck, and he pressed into her, purring faintly, hoarsely, but real. "You came back," she whispered. "You came home." By morning, the word had spread. The hero cat had returned. Villagers gathered at Hannah's house, their boots crunching in the snow as they quietly took turns kneeling beside Echo, petting him, offering soft words and bites of fresh fish. Some brought blankets. One woman cried openly. A boy with a sketchbook handed Hannah a picture of Echo with wings. They didn't talk much. There was something sacred in the moment, something understood without needing to be said. Echo lay in Hannah's arms, purring as if nothing had changed, as if he had never left. But they all knew. He had seen things, felt the mountain shift, heard what none of them had, and he had come back. That evening, the town held a small ceremony. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting everything in soft orange. At the base of the main town shrine, where people brought offerings for the forest spirits, a new wooden carving was placed. It was simple, a cat with alert ears, sitting tall, gaze fixed on something distant. The carving was done by a local woodworker who had never spoken much, but he'd stayed up all night to finish it. When asked why, he simply said, "Because that cat saved my nephew." Children laid small flowers and paper cranes around the carving. Someone lit incense. A man began to play the shamisen, slow, melodic, like the wind between trees. Hannah stood quietly beside Echo, who sat upright on the shrine steps, blinking at the gathering. He didn't seem to understand what the fuss was about. He'd simply done what he always did. He listened. That night, back at home, Hannah opened the window beside her bed and placed a cushion on the sill. Echo leapt up, more slowly than before, but with purpose, and settled beside her. The mountains stretched out in the distance, quiet now, peaceful. The wind moved gently through the trees, but it carried no warnings. Only the ordinary sigh of the season turning. Hannah sipped warm tea, her hand resting lightly on Echo's back. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the snow fall. It wasn't the kind of ending found in books or news stories. There were no headlines, no miracles proclaimed. Just a girl and a cat returned to each other. Whole. The healing didn't come in fireworks or speeches. Came in stillness, in breath, in the warmth of a small body pressed close. Echo blinked slowly, his ears twitching once at the sound of a bird rustling in the eaves. He didn't speak, but he was the one who heard everything.